Morning, everybody, and welcome back to this week's Keeping an Eye on the Geopolitical Ball with me, Jamie Shea, Senior Fellow at Friends of Europe. Well, all of those people, including myself at one stage, who dabble in international relations are used to the sort of perpetual cycle of hope and despair that global developments confront us with. And nowhere has this sort of cycle of hope and despair been more true than of Africa in recent times. Back in the 19th century, it used to be called the Dark Continent because very few people knew much about Africa. In recent years, that darkness, I must say, has given way to some shades of light. We have had some positive developments, particularly with the security situation in Africa. For example, a couple of years back, peace between Ethiopia and Eritrea and an agreement on the border. We had in 2011 the end of the conflict between Sudan and breakaway South Sudan, with South Sudan becoming an independent nation. Then we had a ceasefire in the Tigray, a rebellious province of Ethiopia. We had in 2015 a so called Algiers Agreement, whereby the government in Mali agreed to a ceasefire with the Tuareg rebels in the north and the start of a political dialogue. In Libya, a country which almost fell apart after the fall of Colonel Gaddafi in 2011, the United Nations doggedly persisted with its diplomacy and negotiated an agreement on constitutional reform and elections, the withdrawal of foreign forces, and the disarmament of the various militia groups, offering some hope there as well. In Sudan, the dictator Omar el Bashir, accused of war crimes, finally fell from power, and there was a dialogue between the military and the civilians on a return to civilian government. For me, also another sort of shining example of light in Africa was the growth of these international regional organizations, the African Union, which showed some teeth by organizing a peacekeeping deployment to Somalia. ECOWAS, already in existence for nearly half a century, the Organization of West African States, with 15 members, which in West Africa successfully mounted interventions to restore peace in Sierra Leone and Liberia. We had a group called the IGAD, the Intergovernmental Association for Development in East Africa, which also brokered ceasefires in Ethiopia, and the EADC, the East African Development Corporation, which helped the Democratic Republic of Congo to deal with M23 models. In fact, ECOWAS was particularly successful as an activist regional organization. It developed a policy against coup d'etat. It imposed sanctions on countries that had coup d'etat and military takeovers. It offered mediation to return countries to civilian rule. It had a successful election monitoring. And the president of ECOWAS, currently also the president of Nigeria, Bolo Tinubu, even at one stage threatened a military intervention in Niger, which had a coup last year if it didn't agree to a short-term policy, a program of returning to a civilian government. But just like a week is a long time in politics, so unfortunately, too, a week can be a long time when it comes to security. And this week has been a particularly bad week when it comes to backsliding on the African continent. Mali has denounced that Algiers Accord and has refused Algerian mediation in the conflict with the insurgents in the north. Spectacularly, three countries, Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger, have announced that they're withdrawing from ECOWAS because they believe that the organization has given them insufficient support in their fight against terrorism. In reality, they don't like the idea of ECOWAS pushing them back towards a civilian civilian rule. The International Criminal Court has announced that it's investigating the rapid support forces in the war in Sudan for potential genocide of the non-Arab population in Darfur. In South Sudan, fighting has broken out again between various groups belonging to the Dinka tribe in the Abaya region of the north of the country. In the Democratic Republic of Congo, the UN peacekeeping force MONUSCO has had to open a humanitarian corridor for people in the North Kivu province to escape after renewed fighting with the M23 rebels. The international forces have withdrawn from the DRC, and the DRC also wants to terminate its UN peacekeeping operation by the end of the year, similar to the way in which Mali and Burkina Faso have also terminated their UN peacekeeping operation. So these developments, rather negative, suggest that the old adage of African solutions to African problems, in which we placed so much hope a few years ago, is beginning to run out of steam. Africa needs outside help, not in the form of colonizers, but partners. To some degree, this has already begun in a rather negative way, with the Russian Wagner mercenaries spreading out in Sudan, in Burkina Faso, in the Central African Republic, and now Mali as well, or with interference of different countries in the conflict in Libya. But there have been some more positive developments over the last couple of days, which show that now the West is finally waking up to the importance of Africa and to the need to re-engage. Not just re-engaging to put out the bushfires or the brush fires or for short-term crisis management, but a recognition that the only way to solve Africa's security instability is in the longer-term development of the continent. So this past week we had Tony Blinken, the US Secretary of State, on a visit to Cape Verde, Ivory Coast, Nigeria, and Angola. Now, yes, he did talk a little bit about the traditional security priorities in terms of having more bases for American drones now that the US is not operating any longer out of Niger. But most of his discussions were on opening schools of journalism, or the way in which American technology could help African farmers improve the quality of their seeds and their crops, and even the so-called Loboto corridor, where American investment will help to create a 1,300-kilometer railway linking the Atlantic coast of Africa with the Indian Ocean on the other side, a corridor through Angola, Zambia, the DRC, and Tanzania, which would considerably boost the ability of Africa to trade internally and not just with the outside world, and to ship precious metals like manganese or cobalt or copper from one port to another. Another initiative took place in Rome this week, where Giorgia Meloni, the Italian Prime Minister, invited a number of African leaders to launch the so-called Matai program of Italy, promising to invest 5.5 billion euros in job creation, in greening the economies, in infrastructure programs and investments over the next decade. Now, the Italian offer was not entirely altruistic. Last year, Italy had to receive 152,000 illegal migrants from Africa across the Mediterranean, 47,000 more than in 2022. And Maloney's offer of aid is very much linked to the willingness of the African partner countries to do more to curb the smugglers and the illegal migration operations. But nonetheless, the American initiative, the Italian initiative do show that there is now a new awareness in the need to engage with Africa, establish relations of confidence with the countries concerned, and to commit to long-term development programs, which alone, at the end of the day, can solve the chronic insecurity problems. Now, the Secretary General, the chair of the African Union Commission, Musa Faki Mohammed, was also in Rome, and he said, "We are not beggars, and we're not looking for charity. This is quite right." He called for a paradigm shift in the European approach to Africa towards that long-term engagement. I agree that ultimately is what we're going to need. We're embarking on a long journey here, but at least this new international engagement with Africa does offer us some hope that we will, in future, go have more lightness than darkness on what we have called in the past the Dark Continent. Thank you for listening today, and I look forward, of course, to having you listen to me on next week's Keeping an Eye on the Geopolitical Ball. Farewell from Brussels for now.